أشرقت نفسي بنور من فؤادي حينما رددت يا رب العباد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So as I said that I was going to try and do a quick revision inshallah from Hijrah up to where we got to now. So of course, as you all know, we've completed the Meccan period and we're on the Medina period, but I'm just going to do like a quick just sort of like a quick revision inshallah, just to help some of you along. So I was thinking of doing it in the form of questions, but then I think it gets very disjointed, so I'm just going to go through it quickly. But there are some names that I would like some people to tell me what they can remember from those names. So the Prophet ﷺ, he gets the permission from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to migrate. And when we were talking about Hijrah, if you remember, we said that the Hijrah took place over a period of time, over a period of a few months to a year, and it happened in trickles, right? People started leaving Makkah slowly, little by little, in small numbers, and when most of them had migrated, there's still some more people left, but a lot of them had already migrated. Then the Prophet ﷺ was given permission to migrate, and so he the first thing he did was he went to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's house. And what he did was that the day he got permission and he was going to tell him this news, he covered himself in such a way that his face was covered as well. And he went at a time when people are usually resting. So as you know, in warm countries you have something called the siesta. And so people nap in the afternoon because of the heat. You can't really work at that time. And so it was that kind of time. And Aisha radiallahu anha said that we never expected anybody to enter our house or come into our house at that time. And so the Prophet ﷺ comes in at that time. So they're all a bit confused that who is this, because he's wrapped up as well. And then he goes in and he tells Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he checks with him first, who is in the house. And when he finds out that there isn't so if anybody's mic is not muted, can you please just make sure that you mute your mics? And so he goes in and he asks him if there's anybody else in the house, because this is extremely sensitive information when the Prophet ﷺ has been given permission to leave Makkah. And this is going to be a very, very big move, and it's going to be the starting point of something very big and major, right? And so Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu says that it's only your family, referring to his family as being the Prophet ﷺ's family, and he says it's just Aisha and Asma, I think, who are in the house at that time. Just to point out to you guys, I don't know if you are aware or not, but Aisha radiallahu anha and her brother Abdullah, they were from a mother called Roman, and Asma and Abdurrahman, they were from another wife of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu who did not become Muslim, and her name was Qatila. So Asma and Aisha radiallahu anha, they were quite different in age. So Asma was much older than Aisha. Anyway, so they were both in the house, and then the Prophet ﷺ came in and he gave him the news that he's been given permission to migrate. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he's very, very happy, and he says to the Prophet ﷺ that I've prepared 2 camels, so I'm ready. And he says, please allow me to be your companion. And this is a companionship that was chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu did not even need to really work on it. And the Prophet ﷺ, he immediately accepted Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's request, and he said to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu that I will pay for the camel that you have prepared. And in those days, to prepare an animal for a journey would mean preparation that would take some time. So you can't just go and pick a camel up and say, okay, I'm going to go on a journey with him. Camels which have to travel along the distances have to be prepared. I think it takes about a month or more to prepare them. And so you have to feed them and give them enough drink, and you have to do certain things to actually have them ready for the journey. And so he had been working on that. And he said to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, no, this is a gift for you, And the Prophet ﷺ said, no. He said, I will pay for this camel. And similarly, the Prophet ﷺ, when he arrives in Medina, as we will see later on, and his camel rests in the land of Sahal and I think it's Sahal and Saad, two orphans, and that's where Masjid al-Nabawi is constructed today. And that land again, they said to him, oh, you can just have this land. And he says, no, I am going to pay for it. And so we see that the Prophet ﷺ, he's not just he's not just taking advantage of the fact that he is a Nabi or he is a Rasul, and most people are just willing to give him everything. But he says, no, I want to pay for it. And he does not like to take favors, and he does not like to just accept, things for free. And the Sahaba, they learn these things from the Prophet ﷺ to the extent where they learn that it's not honorable or noble to ask for things or to ask for favors. And so it is said that, the Sahaba was so firm in sticking to these teachings of the Prophet ﷺ that even if their whip would fall out of their hand, they would get off their ride and they would pick it up themselves and get back on, rather than just to say to someone who's standing that, oh, can you just pick this up because I've just dropped it. And so these are things, that we need to pick up along the way as we study the Seerah. And I also wanted to just mention before I started today that, it is a huge honor and a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has allowed us to, and He has given us the opportunity to study the life of the best human being to have walked the face of this earth. And, this is of course, it's only by the permission of Allah that we're able to do this today. There are so many people today who are spending the same time doing, something else. And we could have been amongst those people if Allah had not honored us and favored us and given us this opportunity to learn about this individual. And there's no one better than him who has walked the face of this earth. So it is a big honor that we can study about his life. So they migrate and they set out, and just as they are setting out, they were actually planning to set out the following day, but Jibreel comes and informs the Prophet ﷺ that the Quraysh are plotting and planning to murder him that night. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he hastens and he says that we don't have time to wait and we must leave now. And so immediately, they put their things together and they leave. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's father, who is old and blind, he comes to the house and he gets angry with Asma, and he says that your father is so irresponsible, he's left and he hasn't left anything with you people. Because Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when he goes, he takes everything with him in terms of his wealth, so that he can help the Prophet ﷺ wherever and however he needs it. Asma is clever, and she thinks fast, she thinks quickly, and so she takes a little pouch and she fills it up with some rocks, and she says to her grandfather that feel this and you will see that he has left something for us. And so the old man is blind, and so he feels it and he says, okay, he says, if these are pieces of gold, then he has done well and he has left enough for you people. Anyway, when the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu set out, they get up to this cave, and the Prophet ﷺ decides to stay there for 3 days and 3 nights. And it's interesting why he decides on 3 days and 3 nights. Can anybody, anybody have any ideas why he stays there for 3 days? Why not 2 days? Why not a week? Why not, a different number of days? Any ideas? Any answers anybody has? Wait. My girls have always got their hands up.
I'm just guessing. Is it the moon days?
Okay, no, I don't think so. But that's an intelligent guess. Wait. Okay. So, I don't know. I mean, we've all probably experienced this at one point or another, but have you ever lost something important in your house? So let's say I've lost my my passport, okay? So on the first day, I will most likely turn my house upside down looking for my passport, right? And I will get everyone on it, right? I'm going to tell my kids, I'm going to tell my husband, I'm going to tell my cleaner, I'm going to tell whoever else is around. I'm going to say, if anybody can find this passport, right, I'll reward you. I'll give you something for it, but I need to find this today. That's on the first day, right? I'm going to put my 100% in to look for this. On the second day, I will probably put 80% of my effort in looking for this passport, right? And everybody's still on it. By the third day, it will probably drop to about 40%, right? And by the fourth day, I will probably most likely abandon my search and apply for another passport. Okay? This is just like a general, I think it's just a general way in which we sort of approach these kind of situations. And so it's so interesting that the Prophet ﷺ, he stays there for 3 days, because that's the period of time when the Quraysh are searching as enthusiastically as they can. By the fourth day, I think most likely they've given up, and they think that, oh, he's we lost him. So what happens is that the Quraysh, they set out looking for him, because they try and go and kill him, but then they find out that it's not him in his bed, because he makes Ali radiallahu anhu take his place in his bed, right? And so they start searching for him, and they even get to the cave, right? And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he is extremely stressed when they get to the cave. It's so interesting that of all the places, they're in like an open desert space, that they would even come to exactly that same cave. But they get there, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said that if they were to look down, they would see us. But it just, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects his slaves, they're not able to see them, and they're not able to catch them. And during these 3 days, one of Abu Bakr's sons, he, brings food and some provisions for them, and he basically helps with their upkeep while they are hidden in this cave. When they come out of this cave, they use a guide. Does anybody remember the name of the guide? He had a sort of a unique name, so I would like one of the people who has studied this with me to tell me what his name was.
Amir bin Ubaydi or something like that. Amir bin Ubaydi.
No, but yeah, I can.
Like starts with Abdullah.
Yes, Abdullah.
Yeah. Bin Ubaydi.
Bin Urayqit. Bin Urayqit. Yes, Abdullah bin Urayqit. Okay. So Abdullah bin Urayqit is their guide, and he knows this area really well, and he's supposed to take them to Medina, but he's supposed to take them to Medina through a different route. So if you can, I meant to send this map on the group, but I just didn't get around to it. But if you can all picture, and if you're not looking at your screens, just look at it for a few minutes. So we have Makkah in the south, and then on top of that we have, towards the north of Makkah, we have Medina. Okay, and north of Medina we have Sham, okay, or Syria. I will come to that later, why I'm telling you that. But the Prophet ﷺ, instead of going north towards Medina, he tells the guide to take them south, and then from there they will go round up and go back to Medina, just to dodge the Quraysh and their search. So they actually head, you could say, towards the coast, southwards, and then they turn up and go back towards Medina. Anyway, it takes the Prophet ﷺ about 8 or 9 days, and then he eventually gets to Medina, and he's welcomed with open arms, and he is welcomed as a leader, not as somebody who has come there for protection or for asylum, but he is respected and welcomed and received as a leader. And this is the beginning of you could say an Islamic base once the Prophet ﷺ sets foot in Medina. And so we talked about where did the Prophet ﷺ first arrive?
To Quba.
Yes, that's right. So when they say what are the first 3 masajid that were built, it would be Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, then Masjid al-Aqsa, which was completed 40 years after Masjid al-Haram, and then is Quba, and then Masjid al-Nabawi, because that was made after Quba. So the Prophet ﷺ arrives at Quba, he stays there, starts the construction of that masjid, and he stays with one of his relatives, and then he moves on towards Masjid al-Nabawi, and like we said that he's on his camel, and lots of people are desperate to host him, but he says that the camel is guided by Allah, so let her go and let her decide where she will sit. And so the camel sits down in this land which belongs to 2 orphans, and then the Prophet ﷺ wants to buy this land, and that's where Masjid al-Nabawi is constructed. And so when he arrives in Medina, can you tell me the different types of people who exist in Medina at that time?
The Jews with the 3 tribes.
Yes.
Nadir, Unuqa, and Qurayda.
Very good.
And the Khazraj and the Aus.
Very good.
And
yes.
the pagans.
Yes, very good. So we have the Aus and the Khazraj, and out of the Aus and the Khazraj, you have Muslims and you have mushriks, right? You have people who have not yet become Muslim, and then you have the Jews, like Rabina said, Banu Nadir, Banu Qurayda, Banu Qaynuqa. And the Prophet ﷺ, he arrives in Medina and he has 4 main projects. Can anyone tell me what they were?
First project was the building of masajid.
Excellent.
Second was brotherhood.
Yes.
And the third was the constitution of Medina.
Yes.
And fourth one is the jihad, I think.
Yes, very good. Setting up the army, right? Establishing the army.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. So these are the 4 main projects he has as soon as he arrives in Medina, and he starts working on them really quickly. So Masjid al-Nabawi is set up. So in the masjid, what did we say is the section at the back of the masjid called?
Al-Sufa.
Yeah, it is called Sufa, and the people who stay there are called Ahl Sufa. The second project was the Brotherhood. So now when people are coming into Medina, there's still people migrating into Medina. The Prophet ﷺ, he gives the responsibility of a muhajir to an ansar, and he makes like a brotherhood between them. However, people are still arriving into Medina, and there isn't enough hosts available now to take on more guests. And so this area in the masjid is dedicated to people who don't have anywhere else to stay, and then they stay there until they can either move out or establish themselves. And so that is where Ahl Sufa come in. And the Ahl Sufa, some of their characteristics, if you remember, we said that they were about 76 or so in number, and the number varies because they stay as Ahl Sufa for a while, and then they move on. They might get married and have a house of their own, etc. We said that they were, it was almost like a university, right? So they're constantly with the Prophet ﷺ, studying with him, learning from him. So they were amongst the most knowledgeable people at that time, were the Ahl Sufa. Secondly, they were always willing to go for fighting and for jihad whenever it was needed. And so a lot of them, although they had the most knowledge, they were also getting killed because they would, volunteer and fight. And they were very proficient in Quran because, like we said, that they would spend many hours of their time studying. Now, what is one of the big events that takes place connected to the masjid? Not one, but two big things that happen connected to the masjid after the arrival of the Prophet ﷺ. So, one is the establishment of the adhan. If you remember, there was no adhan before, but they were trying to decide, how do we alert people that it is time to come for salah? And then they decided that they were talking about bells and other things, and then two of the Sahaba have dreams in which they see the adhan, and then they come and tell the Prophet ﷺ, and then he you could say instates the system of adhan, and he gets Bilal radiallahu anhu to call out the prayer. And so the institution of adhan happens then. The second thing connected to the masjid, anybody remember? It's a big thing that happens once the Prophet ﷺ arrives in Medina. What was the Prophet ﷺ longing to do?
Change of Qibla. Someone answered in that.
Oh, okay, sorry, I can't see the chat. I should move this so I can see the chat box.
Wanted to be different from the Jews because
yes, very good. Yeah, changing.
Anyone doesn't call fit, so he wanted to change the Qibla. He kept praying for it.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, and somebody had even answered about the 3 days. So apologies that I was not looking at the chat box. Okay. So yes, changing of the Qibla is something that was a big thing that took place after the Prophet ﷺ migrated, and this is something that he was really longing for, because remember we said that in Makkah he could face Sham with the Kaaba in between. So he's praying towards the Kaaba, but he's facing Jerusalem. But once he comes to Medina, because Makkah is to the south, now he has to face away from the Kaaba and face towards Jerusalem, and this was really troubling him, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changed the Qibla. Okay. Yes, I wanted to ask you another thing about the time of the Hijrah, when the Prophet ﷺ is still migrating. So do you recall that he stops and he milks the goat in a tent that he comes across, and there's a woman there, and we said that she has given one of the best descriptions of the Prophet ﷺ that exist until today. Does anybody remember her name?
Ma'bad.
Yes, very good. Ma'bad. right? Ma'bad, she is like an elderly woman, and they come into her house and they ask for any, if she has anything to eat or drink, and she says that she has nothing, and her husband has gone out to get some things. And then the Prophet ﷺ notices this really shriveled up old goat sitting in the side, and he says, well, what about this goat? And she says, this goat is done its time, he's going to die any day. And the Prophet ﷺ requests her that if she doesn't mind, he'd like to milk this goat. And she laughs because she thinks that there's nothing in this goat. And the Prophet ﷺ still asks her to allow him. And then when he starts milking the goat, if you remember, there is so much milk that comes into the udders of this goat. Even she's shocked that how did this even happen. So that was the incident with Ma'bad. Okay. So the next thing that I was going to say is right. And then that the Prophet ﷺ, he sort of writes out a constitution so that the people who are living within Medina at that time, they have some laws governing their interaction with each other, right? And so there are all these contracts. But if you remember, we said the Jews would actually have been very successful if they had kept their contracts and they had stuck to their word and stayed with the Prophet ﷺ. But what do? One by one, they break their contracts, and they overstep the boundaries, and eventually the Prophet ﷺ has to ask them to leave. And so when the Prophet ﷺ comes into power in the end, they obviously get nothing out of that, because by that time they've severed all their contracts and agreements with the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims. And then we talked about establishing the army, and we talked about jihad and qital, and what are the two types of you could say groups of people. Yes, very good. So we have Ghazawat and we have Saraya. And Sariya, we said, is a expedition which the Prophet ﷺ sends, in which he is not present. So he selects a leader and he sends them. And Saraya are many, right? So even if the Prophet ﷺ says that, can you go and find out, what such and such group of people is doing, or can you go and find out, get information about such and such thing, he might send 3 people, he might send 20 people. All of these are referred to as Saraya. And Ghazawat or Ghazwa is you could say an expedition in which the Prophet ﷺ is the leader and he heads it, and it usually involves fighting. But there are many Ghazawat which started and ended without any fighting, and we talked about all of that. Okay. So that's just like a quick recap of what has happened so far and what we have covered so far. So as you know, last time we talked about a couple of big things. One was a Sariya, which caused some disputes, and it caused the Quraysh to attack the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims. Does anybody remember what it was called?
What's the question, sister?
So there was a Sariya that we talked about last time, and we said that in this Sariya,
Abdullah bin Jash. That's
Abdullah bin Jash was part of that Sariya, yes. And if you remember, we said that the Prophet ﷺ, he sent them very close to Makkah. So they were sent almost near Taif. They were very, very far from, what would be their comfort zone. And we said that they were just supposed to, attack a caravan, but they ended up killing one of the guards and capturing two of them. And then, if you remember, we said that it was one of the forbidden months. And so when they did this and they brought back all the booty and the, not the booty, but, all the wealth of the caravan along with these two prisoners, the Prophet ﷺ was very upset. And then Allah revealed verses about this. So this was one of the saraya that we spoke about. The second important thing that we spoke about was what was happening in Makkah. Sorry?
Abu Sufyan's caravan.
Yeah, so Abu Sufyan takes a big caravan. This is like one of their major caravans that is going towards Sham. And this has got wealth from almost every household in Makkah. And it has got the wealth of the Muhajirun who had to leave everything behind and escape or run away to Medina. So the Muhajirun feel very, very strongly about this wealth because their wealth has now been taken over by the Quraysh in Makkah. And they have, they're basically making business out of wealth that is not even their own. It's wealth that they have just, they've just adopted, or they've just they've just taken for free. And so this huge, massive caravan worth in today's language, millions, if not, more than that, is heading towards Sham. And Abu Sufyan is the leader of this big caravan. And we were saying what happened was that when the caravan is going towards Sham, Abu Sufyan manages to go through another route and dodges the Muslims who are coming to attack the caravan. So he manages to dodge the attack, and he takes a different route and he goes up. And this was called Ghazwatul Ashira. Okay? So when this caravan is going up towards Sham, Abu Sufyan manages to dodge the Muslims, and the Muslims come to the place where the caravan was meant to be, but because Abu Sufyan got some information about it, he took a slightly different route. And so when the Muslims came to attack the caravan, they didn't find it because it had already left for Sham. And so this was referred to as Ghazwatul Ashira, and nothing happened during it. So they went there and basically they had just missed the caravan. Okay? So the Prophet ﷺ, he asks two of the Sahaba to stay in that area and wait for this caravan to return. And they say, if you get any information or any news about this caravan, they're supposed to inform the Prophet ﷺ. And the two Sahaba who he asks to stay and wait and watch are Talha ibn Ubaidullah and Sa'id ibn Zayd. Okay. All right. So now what happens next? Does anybody remember what we said was happening in Makkah while this was going on?
There was a man sent by Abu Sufyan. He was raising an emergency throughout.
Yes, that's
and
right.
There was a dream of Atik also.
Yes, that's right. So now what happens is, before we talk about the man, Atika, who is the aunt of the Prophet ﷺ, she has a dream, and it's a very, very significant dream. And she tells her brother Abbas about this dream. Does anybody remember what this dream was?
Can I say, or someone wants to say?
Okay. If there's anybody else who wants to tell me on the group, you can. Otherwise, one of my girls is gonna tell us. Okay. Yes, Maimuna. Okay, go on. You have to speak up so that everybody can hear you. So are you going to tell us, or shall I get somebody else to tell us quickly? Because quickly. Okay, Rabina, you can tell us.
Yes, there was a camel on Kaaba, and there was a man on a mountain, and then there were rocks because of some volcano or something, and each rock was hitting the inhabitants of Makkah, each house inhabitants.
Okay, so it's just a slight, it's close to what it was, but I'm just going to tell you exactly what the dream was. So she sees that a man has come into Makkah on a camel, and he takes the camel on top of the Kaaba, and from there he starts warning the people of Makkah, and he starts screaming and saying that, oh, people of Makkah, you have 3 days before something is going to happen to you. And then what he does is he goes onto the top of a mountain, and on top of that mountain he takes a rock, and he throws that rock, and the rock rolls down and goes to the foot of the mountain, and when it reaches the foot of the mountain, it breaks up almost like it explodes, and it explodes into these little pieces of stones, and these stones enter every single house in Makkah. This is the dream that she has. And so she tells Abbas this dream, and he tells her, this is a very serious dream, so don't tell anybody. Just keep it quiet, keep it a secret, otherwise everybody's going to panic. So she says, okay, I'm not going to tell anyone. And then he goes and he tells I think he tells Utbah or Walid. And then he tells him that, such and such dream has happened, but he says, don't tell anyone. So Walid says, I'm not going to tell anyone. And then Walid goes and tells, another person. And then this Atika tells him this dream at the time of Fajr, when it is still dark. Okay? He comes after sunrise, Abbas comes after sunrise to make tawaf of the Kaaba. It's just been an hour since he has heard this dream, and as he starts making tawaf of the Kaaba, Abu Jahl and his friends or his circle, they're all sitting they used to have, like today we have coffee shops. So they used to have an area where they would sit and chit chat and talk about things and hang out. Basically, it was their hangout near the Kaaba. And it was called as it was like, you could say it was like their club or their clubhouse, right? And so they're sitting in this nadi, and Abu Jahl calls out to Abbas, and he says, come here. So Abbas says that I want to make tawaf. So he says, okay, when you finish making tawaf, then come here, we want to talk to you. So he finishes making tawaf, and while he's doing tawaf, he can hear that they're all discussing Atika's dream. It's just been an hour since she told him the dream, and they decided that this was going to be kept a secret. One of the lessons we learn from this is that if you can't keep a secret, don't expect anyone else to. So, when we go and blurt out things to people and we say, oh, look, I'm telling you, but don't tell anyone, you can be rest assured that this news is going to travel, because even you couldn't keep it, right? So anyway, then he comes to Abu Jahl, and they're all talking about Atika's dream, and he says that since when did Banu Hashim start producing prophetesses? So he's saying basically, you guys have said, you people, your family claims that you have a prophet, which is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and now he's saying that now you've got a female prophet, right? Because she's getting these amazing dreams that that is supposed to warn us, and it's supposed to startle us. So he's just mocking him, and he says that if in 3 days nothing happens, he says, we will come and we will label the house of Hashim as liars. Okay, they're very upset about this news. So Abbas goes back and he's very disturbed and upset, and the women are very upset with him, and they're saying, how could you let him get away with, you know, saying something like that about us? And anyway, that is when, by that time, Abu Sufyan is returning, his caravan is returning from Sham. So they've done whatever they had to do. Now they're on their way back. Abu Sufyan is a very shrewd and intelligent man. He knows that they were trying to catch the caravan on its way up, and he's expecting that they will try and do it again on their way down. So what he does is, when he gets, you see, like that's why I was saying that I wish I had posted this picture on the group. But Sham is to the north, then you have Medina, and then you have Makkah. So to get from Sham to Makkah, they have to go through Medina. And that is where, you know, these ambushes are taking place. And so when he approaches Medina, he stops. He doesn't come close to Medina. He stops somewhere near Medina. And he starts doing some of his own reconnaissance. So he comes down and he walks and walks and walks and walks and walks until he gets to Badr. And in Badr, he comes across these either camel grazers or shepherds. And he asks them, have you seen anything suspicious, or have you seen any people from Medina here, or, you know, is there anything worth reporting that you want to tell me about? So they say that there's nothing like that, you know, and we're just simple herders, you know, we don't really know what you're trying to look for, what you're talking about, but there's nothing like that over here. And then they say to him, the only thing is that there are two men who came and they filled up their water from the well, and then they park their camels, and they have you know, that's the only different thing that we have seen in this area. So he says that, do they have camels? And they say, yes, they have camels. And he says, can you tell me where their camels are? And they point out where the camels are. And so look at how intelligent and shrewd Abu Sufyan is. And he goes up to the camels and he picks up the camel dung and he breaks it up, and he sees that it contains date stones. And he says, these camels are from Medina, because Medina was known for its date palms, and so they would feed the camels, you know, dates which were not being used, or date seeds as, you know, their feed. And so he knew from the dung that these camels are from Medina. And so he knows that, you know, that there is trouble in the area. So he has two plans. One of them is to change route again. And the second plan is to send an informant to Mecca to prepare an army, because he's expecting that these people are going to be large in number and they're going to attack them, because this is a massive caravan. So what he does is he selects this man called Damdam al-Ghifari, and he says to Damdam that, how long does it take you to get to Mecca? And Damdam says, it takes me about a week. And he says, if you can go quicker than that, the fastest that you have ever traveled to Mecca, he says, I will give you, and he promises him like a very big prize, like 100 camels or something like that. Now, remember that, you know, for us today, camel just means a big walima, lots of food. Maybe we would show off and say, oh, I have a camel, you know. It doesn't really hold that much value for us today. Of course, it's a very valuable animal. I mean, the cheapest, I think camel prices start at 5,000. But in those days, a camel was everything. If they wanted to go somewhere, they needed a camel. If they wanted to give mahar, they could give a camel. If they wanted to eat, they would slaughter a camel. I mean, the camel was basically their everything. So to promise somebody 100 camels is a huge motivation and prize. So Damdam, he goes to Makkah, and he gets there, I think, in 3 days. And so while, Atika has had this dream, and they've had this whole dispute in Makkah, he arrives in Makkah, and because he knows nobody's going to pay attention to him, because a lot of people come into Makkah time to time, right? People come to sell things, people come to as pilgrims, people come because they've lost something, or they've lost a camel or something, so they come to look for it. So people come for many reasons. So when he arrives, he wants to grab their attention because this is a state of emergency. So he comes in, he slices off the nose of his camel. So the camel is probably bleating and or making some sound, and there's blood gushing from his face. He rips up his clothes and makes himself naked, and he turns the saddle upside down, and he starts screaming, and he says, "Oh, people of Makkah! Oh, people of Makkah! Oh, people of Makkah!" And I mean, obviously this is a sight to see, right? So he's got everybody's attention. And then he tells them, that if you care about your wealth and your belongings, then you better put together an army as soon as possible and come to such and such place. And so the people of Makkah, they aren't even concentrating. They're not. Their focus now has shifted from Abbas and the threat that they were threatening the house of Banu Hashim. That is all it's all forgotten, and all their focus is in getting an army together. And Abu Jahl, he's egging everybody on that, we all need to go, and we need to try and, do this as well as we can. And so they all get an army together, and they start heading out. Now, when they start heading out, Abu Sufyan does not know that Damdam got to Makkah, and he got the message across, and they formed an army, and they're on their way. In the meantime, he changes his course, and then he sends another message to Makkah, or to Abu Jahl, saying that your caravan is safe, and I've taken a new route, and there's no need to bring the army anymore. Abu Jahl is determined, and he says that we have got this army together, and we are not going to go back. We are going to go to Badr, and we are going to camp there, and we are going to stay there for a few days, and we're going to take entertainers with us. They're going to dance, and they're going to sing, and we're going to slaughter animals, we're going to eat, and we're going to enjoy ourselves, and we're going to make it known that nobody messes with us, because this is who we are, this is our presence, this is our strength. So he's determined, and he says that it doesn't matter if if the caravan is safe, and if you have managed to dodge the Muslims, we're still going to come, and we're going to show them who we are, and what that we're a force to reckon with. So they go there anyway. Abu Jahl takes them, and they all head towards Badr. Now, there are people amongst the Quraysh who are not keen on this. They don't want to go and fight, such as Umayyah bin Khalaf. So he says that, let's just drop this. There's no need to do this anymore. And so Abu Jahl gets really angry with him. And so what he does is he gets a, like a bukhur burner, a mabkhara, and he puts some bukhur and some stones in it, and he burns it, and he takes it to Umayyah bin Khalaf, and he says, here you go, why don't you perfume yourself, because you're like the women, you don't want to fight, you're like a woman, so why don't you just take this perfume and just busy yourself in perfuming yourself. And so Umayyah gets really angry, and he knocks over this mabkhara, and he says, he gets himself ready to fight. So he's just inciting them, and so they get incited, and they're all ready to fight. And so they all come to Badr and they camp there. Now, what is happening on the side of the Muslims? The Prophet ﷺ, he just a second. Yeah. So the Prophet ﷺ, he does shura with the Sahaba, and he asks them, what is your opinion? What should we do? Because, he hears, he obviously also has reconnaissance, and he finds out that this is what is going on. And so Umar ibn al-Khattab, he says something, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu says something, and the Prophet ﷺ, he's quiet. It's almost as if he's not really interested in what Abu Bakr and Umar have to say, radiallahu anhuma. And then Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, he says to the Prophet ﷺ, it seems, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that you want the Ansar to speak. And so the Prophet ﷺ says yes. So you see, his treaty is with the Ansar, so he wants to know what their view is. What do they advise? What do they think we should do at this time? So Sa'd says to the Prophet ﷺ, O Messenger of Allah, if you want us to lead our horses towards the sea, we will do that. And if you want us to lead our horses towards Barkul Ghamad, which was at the tip of Arabia, it was like a Bermuda's Triangle kind of place, So he's saying that if you want us to go into like some abyss, we will do so. Now this made the Prophet ﷺ really happy. Why? Because his treaty was for the Ansar to protect him within Medina. So he was concerned that what if something happens outside Medina? Am I still going to have their support? And of course, Badr is, outside. And so he is reassured by them that he will always have their support. And this makes him very happy. That they're always happy to protect him. Now the Prophet ﷺ, he heads forward and he's in a rush. So he just says, whoever's ready, just come. He says, we don't have time for, any further preparation. And so as he sets out, there are two people who he feels are underage, and he sends them back. One is Abdullah ibn Umar, the son of Umar ibn al-Khattab, and the other is Bara. And he returns both of these. They're very, very young, so he returns both these children. I think they're 13 or 14 or something. Because he had said, I think it was his, you could say, his preference to take people 15 and up for fighting. So you can see, the youth at that time, the enthusiasm that they had for their deen. I mean, today you'd have to literally push your teenage son out of the door, even just to go and do salah in the masjid. These are children who are dying to go and fight in a battlefield, or, you see, this whole thing started as raiding a caravan, right? That's why it is always said that Badr was never meant to be a battle. It was just to raid the caravan. But because of the circumstances and the situation, it transforms into a last-minute battle. So you can imagine they're very, very ill prepared, right? And emotionally and psychologically they're not prepared. So some of the Sahaba, these are the best, this is the cream of the crop, and some of them did not want to fight because they just wanted to go and grab the belongings of this caravan, all the possessions, and they just wanted to bring that back. They're not thinking about bloodshed and fighting and swords or any of that. And so Allah says in Surah Al-Anfal, كما أخرجك ربك من بيتك بالحق وإن فريقا من المؤمنين لكارهون. Just as when your Lord brought you out of your home, referring to for the battle of Badr, in truth, while indeed a party among the believers were unwilling. They were not keen on this fight. And of course, fighting is something that we don't like, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كتب عليكم القتال وهو كره لكم وعسى أن تكرهوا شيئا وهو خير لكم وعسى أن تحبوا شيئا وهو شر لكم والله يعلم وأنتم لا تعلمون. Fighting has been enjoined upon you while it is hateful to you. But perhaps you hate a thing and it is good for you, and perhaps you love a thing and it is bad for you, and Allah knows while you know not. So this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that they did not like, and as humans we don't like. But this is something that, out of Allah's hikmah, is something that we need to do sometimes. So going back to the scene of the battle. Now, so the Prophet ﷺ, he discusses with his companions, and Miqdad, he stands up and he says something, and Umar radiallahu anhu, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud said, Miqdad stood up and spoke some words. I would sacrifice the world to be the one who spoke those words. What does Miqdad say? He says, O Messenger of Allah, go forth to what Allah Azza wa Jal has commanded you to do, and we are not going to say, like the children of Israel told Musa alayhi salam, go and fight with your Lord, we are going to stay here. Miqdad went on to say, but we will fight in front of you, behind you, on your right and to your left, and we will say, go forth and fight with your Lord, we will fight with you. So he is showing his willingness to give himself for this deen and for the Prophet ﷺ. And this is all very, very reassuring and strengthening to the Prophet ﷺ, right? Because he needs these people to be on his side. And so So what the Prophet ﷺ did is, well, before we go into that, let me just tell you how many people were with the Prophet ﷺ, okay? So, as you know, or you may not know, the number is not exactly clear, but some people say it was 317, some say it was 319, but it was just a little over 300 people. And out of those 300 people, 200 were from the Ansar, and 86 were from the Muhajirin, or the Muhajirun, and there were more from the Khazraj than from the Aus. Why do you think that was the case? Anybody? Why were there more people from the Khazraj in this battle than from the Aus? So, if you remember, we said that the Aus were known for agriculture, and the Khazraj were known for rather than approaching it from that angle, the Aus were towards the north, and the Khazraj were in the lower part of Medina. So when the Prophet ﷺ was leaving, he said that whoever is ready, must come now with whatever is ready with them. There was no time, and he did not give anybody time to go. And like, for example, some of the Sahaba, they said, my animals are grazing in such and such area, so I need to go and bring my animals. And he said, there's no time for that, so just leave it. So it was all done very, very quickly and rapidly. The Prophet ﷺ did not want to waste any time. He wanted to just gather whoever is available and go for this expedition. And so those who lived closer to the you could say the exit area of Medina, they were the ones who came in majority. And that this is why a lot of the major Sahaba, they missed this battle, because either they were not ready or they didn't have what they needed, and they were not allowed to or given enough time to prepare themselves. Okay, so now the Prophet ﷺ, what he did was he needed to find out what exactly is going on with the mushrikeen or the Quraysh. So what he did was he stopped near Badr with one of his companions, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and the Prophet ﷺ, they met this old Bedouin man, okay, and they asked him about the Quraysh and about Muhammad and his companions and what he had heard about them. So the Prophet ﷺ is asking this man, what have you heard about Muhammad and his companions, and what have you heard about the Quraysh? Why do you think he's asking him about both of these people? He's basically asking about his own army and the Quraysh's army. So you could see, that this is just sort of like a war tactic. So without giving him any information, if he asks about his own people and the enemy, the man who's being asked, he can't tell, are you Quraysh or are you with the Prophet ﷺ? Because you're asking about both of them. So it's just like a war tactic. So the old man said, I won't tell you before you tell me which party you belong to. Because he's thinking that's really strange, you're asking about both of them. So who are you? Whose side are you on? And so the Prophet ﷺ said, if you tell us, we will tell you. So the man said, should this be for that? And the Prophet ﷺ said, yes. So the man said, I have heard that Muhammad and his companions went out on such and such a day. If that is true, that if they set out on that day, and if that information that I got is correct, then they are in such and such a place, referring to the place where the Prophet ﷺ and his soldiers or his troop had camped. So he gave him accurate information about where the Prophet ﷺ and his people have camped. So there is a dual purpose in asking him a question like this. One is so that he doesn't know who they belong to, and secondly, to see if he's telling them the truth. So they know where they have camped. So if this man tells them where they have camped and he tells them accurately, that means he's being honest, and he will give the rest of the answer honestly as well. And then he said, and I heard that the Quraysh went out on such and such a day, and if that is true, today they are in such and such a place. So he's saying that the Quraysh, if they set out on that day, then this is where they have camped. And the Prophet ﷺ, so when he had finished, he said to the Prophet ﷺ, of whom are you? So now you tell me that which side do you belong to? And the Prophet ﷺ said, we are from water. Okay, so he gave him this ambiguous kind of answer, and he left so that the man can't keep asking him more questions. So he didn't really lie, but he didn't give him a clear-cut answer, because this is war and war is deception. And so he just gave him like a vague, ambiguous answer that we are from water. And when you say we are from water, that just means, it's not really a lie, because we are all created from water, right? A greater part of our of what we're made of is fluid or water. And shut the door, please. One of you shut the door, please? Anyway, so the Prophet ﷺ, he gets some very reliable and important, valuable information from this old man about the precise location of the Quraysh. And he sends Ali ibn Abi Talib, Az-Zubayr, and Sa'd ibn Abu Waqqas, and a number of his companions to get more information and more news about what is going on the campsite of the kuffar. And what happens is that they find a servant, these three Sahaba, they find a servant who belongs to the army of the Quraysh. And so they capture him. And they ask him some questions. They want to know where Abu Sufyan is. Now you see what happened is, this is something very important that you need to understand. There are two separate things that are going on here now. We have Abu Sufyan, who's in charge of the caravan, and he's in one area. And then we have this army that is camping in Badr. So there are two missions that they need to do. They need to tackle this army, which will mean fighting and bloodshed. And they need to attack this caravan, which means gaining possessions. And all of them just wanted to get the possessions. They don't want to fight. They just want to ambush this caravan, get the possessions, and go back. That's all they wanted to do. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has something else planned. So Allah says in the Quran, وَإِذْ يَعِدُكُمُ اللَّهُ إِحْدَى الطَّائِفَتَيْنِ أَنَّهَا لَكُمْ وتودون أن غير ذات الشوكة تكون لكم ويريد الله أن يحق الحق بكلماته ويقطع دابر الكافرين. Remember, O believers, when Allah promised you one of the two groups, that it would be yours, and you wished that the unarmed one would be yours. But Allah intended to establish the truth by His words and to eliminate the disbelievers. So we will see here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His hikmah, He had a wisdom behind why this was not just going to be a case of simple ambushing a caravan and just taking possessions. Allah is going to establish the haqq through this confrontation between the kuffar and the Muslims. And so Allah says, لِيُحِقَّ الْحَقَّ وَيُبْطِلَ الْبَاطِلَ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُجْرِمُونَ, that He shall establish the truth and abolish falsehood even if the criminals disliked it. So what's happening here is we have the caravan and we have the army. And as Allah is saying that you wished that you could just be in that other group where you can just ambush the caravan and get the possessions, but Allah wanted to establish the truth, and so you have to go through this course and you have to do something that you don't like doing, which is fighting. And this is what is going to be the ultimate outcome of this expedition or confrontation. So now they catch this man who says he is a guard of the army, or a servant of the army of the Quraysh, and they ask him, where is Abu Sufyan? And he says, I don't know where Abu Sufyan is. And they tell him, no, tell us where Abu Sufyan is. He says, I don't know where Abu Sufyan is. He says, I can tell you where Abu Jahl is. I can tell you where he names some other prominent leaders of the Quraysh. Anyway, so he tells them that I know where Utbah is, I know where Abu Jahl is, but he says I don't know where Abu Sufyan is. So they beat him up. And when they beat him up, he says, okay, I'll tell you where Abu Sufyan is. When they stop beating him, he says, I don't know where Abu Sufyan is. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he eventually, he comes and he says to them that, when you beat him, he says to them that when he tells the truth, you beat him up. When he lies, you stop beating him. And this is obviously not the way to get the information out of him. So, he goes and he speaks to this man and he asks him. And this man says, I'm from the army, from the Jaish. So I don't know where Abu Sufyan is. Because remember, Abu Sufyan's taken the caravan and he's gone somewhere. He says, I can tell you where Abu Jahl is. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he asks him, he says, okay, tell me, how many people are there in this army? Now, the Prophet ﷺ is trying to glean some very, very significant information here. So he says, how many people are there in this army? So he says, I don't know. He says, Kafir, right? He just says that there's many of them. He's a servant. He hasn't counted them. He has no idea. Now, see the Prophet ﷺ's, his wisdom and the way he approaches a situation. So he asks this servant, he says, how many camels do they slaughter every day to eat? So he says, one day they slaughter 10, and on another day they slaughter 9. So the Prophet ﷺ says, they are between 900 and 1,000 people. So from the amount of meat that is going around this campsite, the Prophet ﷺ gets an idea of how many people there are. And truly, there are 950 people in that army of the Quraysh. And there's 950 of them, and what was I going to say as well? Yes, and as you know that the Muslims are under a third of that, right? So it's almost as if this is no match. You've got about 1,000 people there, and you've got about 300 people on the opposing side, with hardly anything. They hardly have any weapons or anything. Whereas the Quraysh, they are loaded. They have camels and horses and weapons and entertainers. They've come with their women and their their instruments and their vessels and all sorts of things. They're basically like, because they're trying to show their presence. So they're trying to, go to town with this. Whereas the Muslims, they have very, very few resources. So now the Prophet ﷺ has got an idea of what is going on. We will continue, inshallah, talking about the battle in the next dars. The next dars will be on the explanation of the hadith that we started, and then the following dars, inshallah, we will carry on with Badr. So now we will, in the following lessons, you'll see, we'll talk about the rain and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala assists the believers, and how shaitan, he tries to, mislead the Quraysh, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when Allah's help comes, then at that time shaitan, he takes off and he disappears, because he sees the angels and he sees what is going on. And so it's a very, very interesting and amazing story, but inshallah we'll continue next time. But so far you have an idea of how this was going to be just an ambush of a caravan, and how it suddenly transforms into a battle, and how Abu Sufyan is trying to stop this fighting, because he doesn't need a battalion anymore. But Abu Jahl is determined to go and make his presence known, and so they go and camp out and they insist on having the fight. And you have some idea of the numbers on the side of the Muslims and on the side of the kuffar. And inshallah, when we continue next time, you will get more details about this battle, and try and remember it like a story, so that you don't forget it, and it will be at the tip of your tongues, inshallah. You can tell your children, and you can talk about this really huge, big event in the history of Islam. So with that, inshallah, we will stop now. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask. Otherwise, we will end the meeting.
Fakhrunnisa, I wanted to ask you about the first ayah of Surah Al-Anfal. Was it for this, for the Battle of Badr?
So Anfal has a lot of verses which are referring to the Battle of Badr. I'll have to check and see if the first one is referring to this. So
it's just this ayah, you know. يسألونك عن الأنفال.
Yes, yeah.
الأنفال لله والرسول.
Yeah, so I would have to check on that, inshallah. I'm not sure if it's referring specifically to Badr. Yeah, inshallah. So, but yeah, there are many verses in Anfal which are in reference to the Battle of Badr. So a lot of the ayahs that I'm quoting to you now during this dars, they're from Anfal. Any other questions? Barakallahu feekum. And thank you all of you for attending. And like I said, you know, alhamdulillah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He guided us to, you know, spend this time learning about, you know, the best man to have walked the face of this earth. So this is a big it's a big blessing and honor from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, that He allowed us to do this. Because without Allah's help, you know, we cannot do anything. We cannot learn about anything or achieve anything. So I hope, inshallah, you know, after we cover these few durus, the Battle of Badr will be very clear to you, inshallah, and you will know exactly how it happened and why everybody always says that it was not meant to be a battle and how it ended up being a battle. So next time I'm just going to ask you a few basic questions just to make sure that, you know, everybody is sort of, you know, aware of what's happening. Today's revision took a bit longer because we had a bit of a long gap, but inshallah next time the revision will be quick and we can spend more time talking about, you know, new material, inshallah.
I'm not good in remembering the names.
Okay, no problem. Inshallah, when you hear the sisters mention them, you can try and remember them.
Yeah. I know you say it in such a nice way that I feel like I'm there.
Alhamdulillah. Yes, it's really nice to make these things come back to life and to feel that, you know, you're experiencing that situation. Okay, inshallah. So I will end the meeting, and it's very nice to see all of you here, and inshallah we will see you next week with the hadith, and inshallah look forward to seeing you then. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept this from us and forgive us our sins and reunite us under His arsh on the Day of Judgment. Okay, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.